You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Isn't it beautiful? This is Force 13 Live, and it would appear that, there's a transition underway right now on Force 13. We're overhauling the whole thing, as you may or may not have noticed. We're sort of halfway through it at this point, but of course, we've had real-world events that have really prevented us from actually getting things in place before the start of hurricane season. That's why we've not had any tropical weather bulletins either. Right now though, you're looking at Cyclone... Well, there are some interesting pronunciations about this one. It looks like Amphan, or it could be Amphan, or it could be something else. It's currently got 75-mile-an-hour winds though, according to our latest estimates, and an estimated pressure of 977 millibars, and on a very serious note, this system could become a very powerful storm and could become one of the storms for the record books, because what is expected of the forecast model for this storm is for it to trek towards the north, affecting parts of India or Bangladesh. I just want to make one point clear right now. If this storm makes landfall anywhere between Kolkata in West Bengal and I've lost my train of thought already. The other side, I keep forgetting this name, Chittagong, on the eastern side of Bangladesh. All points between those two areas have a population within, say, a 50 to 100 mile radius of over, I think it was 25 million or 15 million. Huge amounts of people are at risk of this tropical cyclone right now. I also have to make an announcement to camera first thing in this broadcast. Now, some of you may not be familiar with this, especially if you're watching from abroad, and if you're watching just for Cyclone Amphan, which we will get onto shortly, I assure you. But I do have to make a message particularly clear tonight. Last night on one of our videos, which was produced by one of our younger members, Luke, apparently I did not witness this. I was not at the desk. I was away at that time. I think I was relaxing, not near a machine. But some people apparently were being rather abusive, and that is something we don't like to see on our channel. And it's something that I find extremely reprehensible for someone who I personally see as a rising star through this project one day. And we, like anywhere on the internet, the age limit to begin to help us with our work is 13, like you can do when you communicate on any internet forum or any project or any organization. And for someone like Luke, who I'm sure won't mind me saying this, who is extremely proactive and very, let's say, sharp, very sharp person, very passionate about what he does, to be treated like he did by some particular people who we may not mention tonight on that video on the previous night, on the first update on 90L, which is now Tropical Depression 1 and could very soon be our first named storm, was a disgrace. And hopefully we don't see that again, and we will defend him as a team here on Force 13 and anyone else who is subjected to that kind of behaviour. Now let's move on to what's currently going on with this Cyclone Amphan, which is currently active right now. And there is the latest imagery on the water vapour. And now let's introduce our team, which consists tonight of Devon, Ethan, Luke, Isaac, Preston, Strat, and Euxinator. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Good evening, Nathan.
Well, we've got a serious situation on our hands. It's becoming rather clear, isn't it? Earlier it was a stage 8 on the CDPS, Devon. You're saying stage 7 at this point. That's still really big. You
Yeah.
know all about the potential impacts that this kind of cyclone can produce. So why don't you begin for us tonight?
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and review what the potential impacts that we're talking about here are. Because we've got just to put it bluntly here, a potentially catastrophic situation developing here rather rapidly with a currently rapidly intensifying now hurricane strength cyclone Amphan here in the Bay of Bengal. It's currently expected to make landfall in an extremely populated region along a very low-lying river delta that is extremely prone to storm surge. The last time that this area would have been affected by a storm of this strength would have been Cyclone Sadir of 2007, and that storm's death
Yeah.
toll was in the five figures range. As Nathan has already said, we're talking about this cyclone impacting at the minimum 15 million people with at least tropical storm force conditions during the time that it is crossing over land, which is a very scary situation to say the least. When we go ahead and take a look at the cyclone destruction potential scale, CDPS, as you guys would know it, it's currently rated at a stage 7, and that's absolutely no joke. When we're talking about stage 7 storms, we're putting it in the same context as Hugo when it hit Puerto Rico, Andrew when it hit Florida, or Hugo when it hit Puerto Rico, or Georges as it hit the Dominican Republic. And in fact, we're putting it in the same exact region as when Cyclone Sidir ended up making landfall in Bangladesh back in 2007. We're looking at very similar impacts. Cyclone Sidir brought 20 to 25-foot storm surge over to the region. We're probably going to be seeing something similar here if the forecast 3 days out verifies, even if it's close to what they're currently calling for, which I'm seeing models going conservatively to 120 to 130 miles an hour. I've seen, I believe, the nav gems going all the way up into the Cat 5 region, which would be
Oof.
absolutely terrifying.
And that's
Or
nuts, by the way. We'll talk about that a little later on. Just want to ask a
Yeah.
question, though, and maybe other people could chip in on this one as well now, because there is still a fair scope as to where it could make landfall. We've talked about the huge displacement of population, the density of population from West Bengal over to the eastern side of the Ganges River Delta. But some people, particularly in India, who may be watching right now, are suggesting and maybe hinting that it may still deviate further west, and you could be looking at more of a funny type track. What do you think about that?
I I've been making some of the video updates on the storm, and particularly to date, the European model has typically been the one that's been furthest west with this, consistently showing an India landfall to date. Some of the other models have started to shift more towards that being a possible solution as well. I know the GFS has moved quite a bit west in the past couple runs compared to what it was saying, let's say, even 18 hours ago. But there still is significant split. The HWRF, the Icon, the NavGem are all further east significantly into Bangladesh. Some of them try, at least on the ensembles, to bring it even towards Myanmar. So even though, the largest threat range for potential landfalls, Bangladesh or India, we still have to monitor for any specific location because that's still unsure.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Well,
where this storm eventually does go, it's still going to bring those catastrophic impacts that we are expecting uh, when this storm does really ramp up in its intensity, which we forecast will come fairly soon. So wherever it does make landfall, it will likely have some very significant impacts, whether that's in India or Bangladesh or perhaps even Myanmar if the some of the ensemble models haven't forecast.
Yeah, and I just want to point out as well that even if it hits Myanmar, it would still be a catastrophic storm. It would still bring all these factors, and so no matter what, one of these three countries will be hit by the storm, most likely by
And
Wednesday.
more importantly, the exact landfall location doesn't necessarily mean that only one country will get adverse conditions. You can see a landfall significantly,
Yes.
let's say,
Sure.
into India or significantly into Bangladesh, and both countries
So
will get wide areas of tropical storm force winds and severe flooding.
correct. So we're talking about this storm is very large. At landfall, we're talking about a tropical storm force wind field that can extend over 200 miles away from the center. And a hurricane force wind field that it can extend over 50 miles
Now,
from
this
the
is something
center.
pretty interesting, Devon, and we discussed this a little bit off air. And yesterday it was interesting. Today it's still interesting. The last ASCAP pass, it's been quite a while now. It's been about 11 hours. But at the time, it was already looking pretty damn good, wasn't it? It had that massive blow up of
Yeah.
convection going on. But at the time, it only had about 25 or 30 nautical miles of tropical storm force winds, and that was only in the northwest quadrant. And it's probably not grown that much now, but despite that 35 knot small area, probably a tiny 65 knot area right now, the 30 knot winds, which is just short of tropical storm status, extended no less in diameter than 620 nautical miles, which is an enormous area. Does this tell us anything in particular?
Well,
Well,
those winds are just barely weaker than the gale force winds, and obviously it's not going to take the storm to get that much stronger to be able to push those winds up. So, yeah, the storm's it should not be downplayed. This storm is going to be much larger size-wise, not necessarily winds. It's probably going to be weaker in winds than Cyclone City or at landfall, but when we're talking about the size of the storm, we're talking about a storm that might be 1.5, maybe even twice as big as Cyclone Sidir was. Sidir was actually a rather compact tropical cyclone. Same thing with the 1991 Bangladesh storm. Those were two pretty compact storms. We're talking about a much larger system here, which usually the larger systems with weaker winds actually bring a higher storm surge than the stronger storms with smaller wind fields. And when we're talking about an area, we're talking about islands here in Bangladesh that only have maximum heights of 6, 8, 10, 12 feet. And we're talking about storm surges that are going to be 10, 20, maybe even as high as 30 feet in some areas. We're talking about islands that are just going to be completely flooded over.
We were talking about worst case scenarios earlier today. At one point, the HWRF model, it's been well publicized, had a pressure of 897 millibars near landfall in Bangladesh, which I would think would be a category 5, and a probable landfall on, guess where? Bowler district. Now, of course, that name rings a bell from 50 years ago in November 1970 when a cyclone became known as the Bowler Cyclone, slammed into that part of Bangladesh, killed possibly 500,000 people in that area. And I did also get a mention earlier today on Twitter, having a few conversations, people saying that it will be better now because of early warning systems. But there's more things to think about than that. There's two things right now. One, Bangladesh has nearly 3 times the population that it had in 1970. And two, the C word, which props up again. And I'm sure movement isn't going to be particularly easy in the path of this storm.
I mean, there's no easy way to downplay the amount of damage that the system can do anywhere from the far western reaches of Myanmar to Bangladesh to the far eastern parts of India. You could see some life-threatening situations in the areas and also possibly some catastrophic damage. And there's just no way to downplay that. People's lives could be heavily affected or just ended with this system.
It should, yeah. So it should be noted that if we're talking about this storm hitting the United States, we're talking about a storm that would be causing tens of billions of dollars worth of damage, like easily. That's the type of destructive power that we're talking about with this storm. And obviously, it's not going to cause that much damage in this region for reasons not associated with how strong the storm's going to be. But when you talk about how vulnerable the population is, and that historically, I think Bangladesh is home to 10 of the 20 deadliest tropical cyclones on record. We're talking about a potential humanitarian crisis within the area. We're just going to have to keep a very, very close eye on this storm. It's an extremely concerning situation for me because even if this was hitting the U.S., we'd be talking about a catastrophic situation, tens of billions of dollars of damage, just a horrible situation outright. And we're having one of those storms affect quite possibly the most cyclone vulnerable region in the world.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's any other language that can possibly be used to describe this situation.
And unfortunately, Bangladesh has been a hotspot for terrible cyclones that have hit the region. And it just goes to show that Bangladesh is no stranger to these intense storms that work their way up and impact them. So this is obviously a very dangerous situation for Bangladesh, and everyone in Bangladesh, in eastern India, western portions of Myanmar need to take this storm very, very seriously.
Best estimates in the world, but it is one of the tools that we do look at quite often in the Indian Ocean when satellite imagery is not quite as good as we'd like it to be. We take a look at some of the global looks. I'll get that up in just a moment. I don't know if anyone who hasn't spoken much yet would like to contribute.
I'm just looking at the satellite imagery
Isaac.
right now of the cyclone, and the first visibles are starting to come in now of the cyclone, and it looks pretty nasty, needless to say.
Oh, let's
And,
take a look. There it is.
Outflow extends quite a bit far north and quite a bit far south, past below the equator, actually. I was last looking at it. So definitely a serious storm. Whether or not it develops into a major cyclone or not isn't really an issue. Just the sheer size of this, even if it doesn't strengthen anymore, is going to be something to deal with. And unfortunately, I hope it doesn't. I hope they're taking it seriously and they're evacuating people from the affected areas, the areas that are going to be affected rather in the next coming days from this cyclone. Really serious event.
Yeah, I don't think that that's going to be a question of it. Mandatory evacuations are going to have to be put in place very soon. And unfortunately, obviously, due to the COVID-19 situation, that's going to be an extremely difficult process right now.
And what's more, Devin, you could have 100 million people in the country.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. There's going to have to be storm shelters put in place. Obviously, we can't have 100 million people evacuating. It'll never work. It'll never work. I mean, just think about the logistical nightmare if we had like a Cat 4 or 5 hitting South Florida. Okay? Think about all the people. We're talking, and that would only be moving about 30 million people.
Even if you had 20-lane highways, and I don't think they've got any there.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just think about evacuating South Florida. We have a Cat 4 or 5 heading for South Florida. You got to evacuate 20, 30, maybe even 40 million people out of the coastline there. You're not getting all those people out. You're going to have to set up storm shelters. You're going to have people, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to evacuate everyone. It's not going to happen. Some people can evacuate, but definitely not everyone. And you don't want people trapped on the road during this storm. That's the absolute last thing that we need. So Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar are all going to have to set up storm shelters for this storm. They're going to start preparing for this right now. Countries to look out for their citizens for the most part. They're going to have to put their shelters, and obviously those shelters are going to be extremely difficult to figure out because of COVID-19. But we're going to have to do that. One the case I would like to point to right away. Just a very similar rating on the CDPS, hitting a very similarly vulnerable area. When we go back to 2016, take a look at Hurricane Matthew hitting Haiti. We're talking about a very similar situation here, only if Haiti was populated by 110 million people.
Gee.
Which
That's literally what we're looking at here.
This is only really further complicated by the fact that the time frame until adverse conditions start to impact the land really, to some extent, is only about 3 days away because of the size of the system. A lot of the big Atlantic storms that we've covered in the past, we'll be tracking them for over a week before it really gets close to a significant land impact. But this is 3.5 days to 4 days max away from landfall already.
I mean, that's still an appreciable amount of time.
I mean, you want to think about how long we were tracking Hurricane Florence.
Now, that one we had an extremely long lead time for, about 14 days.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
those Cape Verde type storms, we had a week and a half when we're like, all right, yeah, this is probably going to come close to hitting the Carolinas, and people are going to have to take, and the models forecasting that storm. And you take a look at this, you got three. I mean, the models have been saying that this storm's going to be forming. It's going to be quite big for several days already. So you can bet that emergency management in all three of these countries have already been preparing for this storm. And hopefully the citizens have also taken notice. The news and the media in the area have also taken notice. And I could just hope that everyone's going to take this situation as seriously as it should be warranted.
Yeah, that's a good point, Devin. This is a very, very dangerous situation. And I really do hope that the governments in these regions are taking it seriously. And if you even are in those areas, please take the storm seriously. Make sure that you have a place to go. Review your safety plans. This storm, like you said, Devin, is 3 to 4 days away. Normally, we have very long lead time. And, we've been seeing this system consistently been shown on models for perhaps even a week now. And I really do hope, Devin, that they are preparing for the system, as you have mentioned.
I mean, when you have basically the Mississippi Delta in like the size of a country like Bangladesh is basically all just. It doesn't even have to be a strong storm, as Devin said earlier. The storm is probably going to be big. Like the last storm that we had was Vangfang, and that was a pretty small storm, especially compared to something of this size like Amphan. Now, what we're going to see here is storm surge probably higher than at least 20 feet, and that's nothing to take lightly at all.
All right. I want to explain this graphic's been on the screen for a little while. This is the satellite rain estimates, and the colors that you're looking at there correspond to rain rates per hour in millimeters. I always have to familiarize myself with what each color means. I'm just about to do that now when this thing stops playing up. So the blues there you can see on the very edge of the cyclone. You see just a few little stray bands moving over parts of Tamil Nadu and neighboring states of India,
including yeah, and these outbreaks are going to start affecting cities in India like Chennai, or I believe that's how you say it, in India, which is a big city. So big cities are already getting affected by the storm from its outer bands.
Yeah, Chennai, not too, just little tiny little bits and pieces. But those blue areas then, that is rain rates of 5 millimeters per hour or less. The greens, that's 5 to about 12 millimeters per hour. The yellows, and there's a light yellow then a dark yellow, that's around 12 to 20. And then you have the orange, which gets you to about 24. And then there's a sort of a dark rose colour, which takes you up to 30. And then you have the light rose colour, which is, you can see it somewhere near the centre of that storm if we zoom back in again, where the most rainfall is falling. That light rose colour, that's 30 to 40 millimeters of rain per hour. The red, 40 to 45. The purple there, or violet, 45 to 55, and then you've got black, which is just over 55 upwards. And in some
Good
of those
Lord.
areas, huge amounts of rain. But I'll tell you
So we're
what.
talking.
Mhm.
So we're talking about the black regions on that. We're talking about roughly 2 inch per hour rain rates.
Yes. Maybe even 3. As a matter of fact, it even topped the scale during Vong Fong in the Philippines a few days ago. At one point, when it was over Samar for 1 hour at least, it went to the grey, which is beyond black, and I've never seen grey before. Didn't even know it existed. But grey is 75 millimeters of rain per hour or higher. That's 3 inches.
That's
And that
insane.
happened for 1 hour over central Samar. But just zooming out on this imagery, and you can get a whole look of India and the whole Bay of Bengal, really. First of all, what you'll probably notice most is a huge amount of extra rainfall, partially monsoonal by the looks of things there, to the south of the cyclone, which is wrapping its way around from the Andaman Islands, south of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, a little bit of rain that's just been dying away, especially in the southwestern part of the island. But you can see it looks a lot more monsoonal down there, and very scattered in a way. Large amounts of rain here and there that are just moving around. Further north, you've got what you would typically expect to see in tropical cyclones, and that's pretty sporadic bands on the outermost bands, very sporadic, and you've got that leading edge, which is already not too far from the coast of Bangladesh. You can see that leading edge there, which is just about reaching Puri right now in Odisha. It's already past Visakhapatnam and is moving through halfway through Myanmar at this point as well. There's probably not going to be too much in that, although some locations may get a quick squall. But the main bulk of the storm, if we were just to draw some lines maybe, let's say that this is the edge of the real part of the storm, measured in miles to the closest point of land, along its forecast track, that is, around 280 miles from central eastern parts of India, which is, how much is that in kilometers? Something like 400? But quite a distance anyway. If you've just joined us, it's coming up to 7 a.m. in India, and we are watching our main feature tonight, which is Cyclone Amphan, I think it is. Amphan.
Like UN.
I can't quite get the grips with that one. And now we move on to the elephant in the room, and I am going to make Devon Williams extremely angry.
Oh no.
Because I think it's healthy to make Devon very angry at times, and that's by taking us to this imagery of Tropical Depression 1, which has formed in the Atlantic, just to the northeast of the Bahamas. And it is somewhat serious. It's a tropical storm, watch out, if you've not heard. Surf City to Duck, North Carolina, including the Pamlico and Albemarle Sounds. Tropical storm watch in effect. So I don't think we'll be hearing much from that part of Pennsylvania, but the rest of the team, any comments on this new tropical depression?
Well,
Oh, hold on, one at a time. Who was speaking there? Was it Ethan?
Yes, it was.
Go ahead.
Recon has went in, and they have found 45 knot winds at the 850 millibar level. That would indeed support a intensity of 40 miles per hour for the storm, so it would not surprise me to see at the next update from the National Hurricane Center that we have Arthur. Would not surprise me at all.
Yeah, right now they're flying through
That's
it
no
right
good.
now. Their latest pass, the last drops upon, they took pressure 1006. So it isn't a particularly strong system, but it could get a bit stronger as it gets closer to those outer banks.
The model split on this system in particular, once you get to the 3-day mark, is really, really wide. typically there'll be a general consensus with deviations, once you get to the 4 or 5 day range. But there's an unusual steering pattern that's going to take place with this mid-level low coming down from the middle of the United States. That models are extremely split on which direction it'll take the storm. About half of the models say that it'll push it out to sea. And
Somewhat
that's the
embarrassingly, I don't actually have any cone graphics with me right now. So if anyone wants to show those, just show people what the situation is with that for a few minutes. But the
I can build that
I
in.
appreciate a bunch of people really, 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 really want to talk about Tropical Depression 1, but it is, even though it's an early season system, it is not a massive threat to land. What stage is it on CDPS, Devon? 1?
I don't think
Haven't rated it.
Haven't rated it.
I think it's a
it's a 1.
It's a
But
1 out of
even if
10.
so even if it were to take the weird model solutions to try to swing into the mid-Atlantic states, in comparison to what's going on at the same time across the world with Amphan, it's really nothing too exciting to look at.
Yeah, and it's not like compared to Amphan or Amphan,
Um,
it's very it's basically like it's basically, I don't want to like say it's irrelevant because it's not. It's just it's not worth talking about right now.
But you're expecting a 60-mile-an-hour peak, Luke.
yes, on my forecast, I weighed in all the options actually, and so the NHC does agree with me that this will peak, that we think this will peak at 60 miles per hour. And, I mean, there's a lot of evidence for it. Most statistical models have it going there. And considering that it's already tropical, it doesn't have to take the time to transition
Yes,
out of
that
subtropical.
was a question that was being raised quite a lot, wasn't it? Whether it was going to be a tropical storm or a subtropical storm, and we really couldn't call it for quite a while. But I think I was pretty convinced when it was passing the Florida Keys that it would probably end up being a tropical entity.
If it were to make landfall in the Outer Banks with an intensity of 50 miles an hour, we would be talking about a CDPS rating of 7, stage 1.
Stage 1.
Which stage 1s are extremely insignificant.
And when you have
You can tell Devon's disdain for this.
This would probably be if you're being irresponsible and going out to try to surf during this, to be honest. But if it were to make a landfall in the Outer Banks, continue to move, west of the overall consensus in the short term, you might get some inclement conditions and, more like a nor'easter in terms of wind and total rain. But in comparison, again, to what we're dealing with on the other side of the globe, it's merely a speck.
Yeah, I think Strat put it very well there. While the storm could produce some inclement conditions, Umpun is really the taking the cake right now, as it could deliver some very life-threatening conditions to areas of India, eastern India, Bangladesh, and western Myanmar. Now, I just want to mention the conditions that we're seeing with Umpun. We're seeing water temperatures reaching up over 31 degrees Celsius, which really is incredible. And Umpun really has all the ingredients it needs to become a very powerful cyclone on approach.
It's crazy. And we're looking at it again right now. It is going to be the main bulk of our stream content in this hour of coverage. We don't really know exactly what our schedule is going to be yet. We're still working with this new method. What's happening is that I've been using the same methods of live streaming for 5 years and haven't changed a thing, and now I'm changing everything because, we want to take that next step up, and I hope you're enjoying the slightly new look so far. There is more to come. But we'll be covering, obviously, this storm very closely. I think we will be duty bound by this point to leave this stream running after we finish this hour of coverage and keep you with an automated stream showing the latest satellite imagery. That's what we plan to do at the end of this.
Just to point out, if the storm, again, if it were to make landfall in the Outer Banks, currently the best analog that I'm seeing, looking through my database, would be subtropical storm Olga from 2007 hitting Puerto Rico.
Right. So that's
And
regarding
if
TD1L.
you don't know what the system is, that's why.
Oh, God. Well, speaking of our advisors, we actually did make one for actually Cyclone Amphan around a few hours ago.
Yes,
Actually,
we've been showing it on and off on our stream here.
Yeah.
You can see it up there at the top of our image. But also one more thing. Who's noticed? It's started. The first I don't know if anyone noticed, but the first National Hurricane Center Advisory on Tropical Depression 1L was the first time that they have used a 60-hour point on their cones, and that's what they're doing now for this season and beyond.
Interesting.
Not noticed that. Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, they've got a 60-hour point now as well. All right, so, well, we've covered the bulk of what the situation is right now. It's time for you to chip in. Viewers, send in your questions. Start your message with Force 13, all in text. We're right here and waiting. Here I am in Studio 4. It's a lovely studio, by the way. Get a little bit of musical remedy every so often as well. But we're here to take questions. We really do want to serve you and answer, the burning questions that you have right now, and possibly, maybe, depending on how we do, we could do some personalized forecasts. But I'm sure we'll get lots of questions about all kinds of topics. We will be guided by the viewers. Devon, I'm sorry, but if everyone asks about Tropical Depression 1, we gotta answer them. So,
Okay.
let's see. Well, there's already some coming in now. So, is there...
I saw one.
Yes?
I saw one that really caught my eye. So TJTJ asks, why doesn't any hurricane hit Africa?
Which part of Africa?
Yeah, if you're talking about the Southern Atlantic, I don't recall there ever being a hurricane that's ever hit.
Actually,
Not really.
there has been one system. This is a very rare occurrence, but it was off like the Africa curse.
We did discover a system. That's for another day. Here's a question: is there any hope that Amphan will take a turn to the west, avoiding the Bangladesh River Delta?
Well, I mean, yeah, but it still hits a pretty bad location.
It is currently in the cone right now, and the ECMWF is trending west, but I haven't seen anything much. I haven't seen a landfall further west than West Bengal. If there has been, please inform me.
Yeah, no, I haven't either. There was a time where the ECMWF was going quite far west, but was it further west than West Bengal? I'm not... Yeah, I think it was going for Odisha at one point, but it did go back east again.
I will say all that really happens if the landfall point to the east is you're really just shifting the worst conditions from one high population area to another.
Yeah.
So,
but with regards to
really
models, one thing I forgot to talk about was, the NavGem's gone nuts. The NavGem usually is extremely mild-mannered, very weak on all of their storms, sometimes by 2 or 3 categories, and it's been going absolutely nuts. Yesterday it was saying that it would be 155 miles per hour and a pressure of 930 millibars. Last night it said it would be a category 5, and goodness me, if the NavGem was right all the time, or with that extrapolation at least, that it's low-balling all the time, then good grief, how strong a storm would we see out of this? I don't think that's going to happen, thankfully.
I don't want to think about that right now.
Let's not think about that, but did you say this on stream before, Devon, or not? I can't remember. You were talking about how it's strengthening quite rapidly and how you think it won't sustain itself because of that reason.
Oh, yeah. So typically, what happens with storms affecting the Bangladesh area is that they usually end up peaking before landfall and then weakening. That's the same thing that you had with Cyclone Sidr. It peaked as a Cat 5 and then it weakened by a couple mile an hour before making landfall as a Cat 4. Still a 5-figure death situation, obviously, but that peaked further out. And when we're taking a look at this storm, it's looking like it's going to be roughly the same thing, where the storm has rapidly intensified from a tropical depression to a Category 1 hurricane in just a span of 24 hours. It's ridiculous. And it's likely to maintain its appearance. Right now, it's dealing with a little bit of dry air, but once it gets that filtered out, probably within 12 to 24 hours, it's going to start. There's nothing stopping this storm from going straight up into the categories and peaking at whatever it decides to peak at. And that's probably going to take 36 hours most. So we're talking once this thing ends up peaking, we've got maybe an 18 to 24 hour period after that where the storm would be able to slowly weaken as it gets closer to land. Hopefully that's the case and it doesn't keep on intensifying as it gets closer to land, because no, Bangladesh, I've not seen it peaking at landfall. So if there's one good thing coming out of this, that's at least a trend that I've been seeing that is a good thing.
That is a silver lining. Although we're still thinking Category 4 for landfall.
Yeah. I mean, we're still looking at 140 miles an hour, and considering the nav jumps up in the Cat 5 region, the HWRF's been borderline Cat 5. The GFS has been pulling up pressures in the Cat 4 to Cat 5 region. That might even be conservative, but 3 days out yet. Definitely don't want to be alarmist.
Yeah.
Here's some first visible imagery of Cyclone Amphan right now by the Himawari 8 satellite. I love this kind of imagery, where especially when you see Indian Ocean storms when presented on this near the edge of the Earth there. Looks rather ferocious. Let's just zoom out a bit on that and show you the sort of scale that we're looking at here. So there you can see the whole Indian Ocean region, and I tell you what, there's loads of disturbed weather to the south of the storm, extending not just to the equator, but about the same latitude opposite the equator as well, which is remarkable. Not entirely associated with the storm, but it's just a lot of doldrums over there. What you can also see on this image here is what's left of a very sorry looking Vong Phong, which is actually just next to Taiwan, which the models didn't take it to, although it is extremely weak, so I suppose that's why. But there's not much to say about Vong Phong. That's one of the first mentions we've had of it this whole stream. But that's first light over Amphan right now, which I still don't know how to pronounce, and I think Strat wanted to go next.
I was just going to make a brief comment, is that, even if the storm were to weaken slightly before landfall, not only is it still very likely going to be an extremely powerful storm, but if it makes landfall anywhere in the Delta area, you're looking at extreme storm surge. And as we know, and it's, important to reiterate, despite the fact that oftentimes, media in general focus mostly on the wind speed, the most deadly part of cyclones is flooding more than anything else. That's usually about 90% of deaths related to
absolutely. The biggest threat from this storm is absolutely going to be the storm surge, without question. I mean,
yeah, almost.
I mean, when you're talking about EF3, EF4 winds, yeah, that's pretty bad. But when you're talking about storm surge that could potentially get as high as doubling the maximum elevation of these low-lying islands in the Ganges River Delta, yeah, we're talking about flooding being by far and away the massive concern here.
Furthermore on that is that the storm is already pretty large too, at least in comparison to what we were covering literally 2 days ago, and it's only probably going to get larger from here, so it's going to have the next 3.5 to 4 days to just start churning more and more water around it, and build itself up to be an even bigger storm surge threat. I'm not using this as an exact comparison, but you got to keep in mind that even though Katrina only made landfall as a Category 3 in New Orleans in the area, its storm surge from when it was at its peak and by churning its water around for so long as a large system was massive, and you're looking at a similar threat
32 feet
in terms of getting
in
storm surge
Mississippi.
like that here.
Yeah,
When
I
you-
don't I don't think this is going to get Katrina levels of storm surge, but we're at least looking at
It
Cyclone
doesn't need
City
to, though, does it?
storm
Hey.
surge here. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a similar analog where you have an extremely low-lying area around a river delta, and a very large and powerful hurricane comes and smacks them head on. You're gonna get a lot of storm surge.
when you
Now-
when
Luckily for us, New Orleans is really the only largely populated area in that region, with a couple of million. Take Katrina, put 150 million people in Louisiana. That's what we're looking at here.
All right, I know you guys have a lot to talk about, but let's take more questions. Will Bertha form next week in the Gulf of
No.
Mexico?
no, and
Big no.
This is a week out. No model shows anything in there, and no.
You want to go to the fake news time
You
frame,
know,
which
I'm
is a
just,
week
I'm just gonna say, yeah, it's gonna form because it's 2020 and it hates everyone.
Yeah.
Oh God.
I was gonna say, if you want to go fake news and go that far out, which we shouldn't, you shouldn't really go for accurate forecasting of formation in general anywhere past 5 days. If you really, really want to stretch it, it's 7 at most. If you want to go even further than that, maybe something out northeast of the Bahamas in like 2.5 weeks, but that's way too far out to have any sort of consideration as anything legitimate.
I mean, it's just you can't really ask that question.
Fantasy booking, that's all I have to say.
The GFS
Ask
showed
them.
nothing. No.
GFS 300 plus hours equals Hurricane Wiki.
All right, can everyone still hear me here?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Nelson has just asked me if I will wear the Cybermen helmet. So I am. There I am here on the live stream wearing that, so I hope that really helped you, Nelson. Let's go look at something else.
You're welcome, Nelson.
Thank you.
I'm sure I've really pleased Nelson there.
Now, please send me some LSU merch.
I bet you
asking,
thought I
could
wouldn't
the
do that. We had more questions. Is it possible for the storm to just go west? Well, Vong Fong did, but I don't think this is.
Yeah, unfortunately, this storm is not going to be like Dorian and go due west.
If
No.
it were to go due west, it'd be going straight into land anyways, is the unfortunate thing as well.
Here's a
Yeah,
question.
and there's not a good place on the eastern part of India for it to hit either.
Okay. Is there going to be... Do you think there will be any tornadoes with the Atlantic Depression in the Outer Banks?
Sure,
I
the
think
Storm Prediction Center will put a 5% risk up. There's always a possibility,
yeah,
but...
Actually, wait. So before that's mentioned, I have been seeing, there has been some rotations within the depression already spotted by Florida, actually.
I don't think those are anything though.
Well, they ended up not being anything, but there were severe thunderstorm warnings earlier that were hinting towards a possible formation of a tornado from that depression.
Whenever you have a tropical storm going over land, you have the possibility of tornadoes. I don't really particularly know what the Outer Banks are like, so I wouldn't be able to really speak that much. But whenever you have a tropical cyclone interacting with land, there's always possibility of tornadoes. It's just keep a lookout. Just watch your, either turn on your weather radio and take a listen, or just keep like the local news on. There'll be an alert that comes up if there's a tornado warning. That's really all that I can say.
Yeah, one question that I've been seeing in the comments is, what are the chances that this storm gets to a Category 5 on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale?
Which
Can I?
which storm?
Which storm?
I think we're gonna know. Okay, wait. Can I answer this
I
question?
have to ask that question because I know that there'll be a couple of people asking if O1L is going to become a Cat 5.
Okay. So
Definitely not,
no.
but this is the one we're talking about here.
on our cone, we had it peaking at 155 miles per hour. Now, usually when you're predicting stuff, you give it or take 5 miles per hour. But when you have something as strong, anywhere plus 140 miles per hour, there's really not much of a difference between a Cat 4 and a Cat 5 at that point. It's just a category. You're going to see some minor differences in damage, but the storm surge is
Right.
going to be utterly insane with this system either way.
And again, when you're talking about that the main threat from this storm is going to be the flooding regardless of intensity, and the fact that we only need to have a 10-foot storm surge for a catastrophe to be in the region, and whether if it's a Cat 4, Cat 3, or even a Cat 2, honestly, we're going to be getting a 10-foot storm surge in this region. So,
Oh yeah.
I just saw a question in chat. Air Force 13, will Dorian 2.0 form on June 1st?
What?
No.
That's the question I
Okay.
just mentioned.
No.
I don't know what to say.
No.
Strat,
No.
please time out the gentleman that wrote that comment.
Yes. I for once agree.
Find it. I got it.
All right, let's go quick fire if we can. We've got loads more questions here, and we've only got 8 minutes. How likely do you think TD1 will brush coastal New England?
Oh, well,
Probably
taking a look at the it's 5 days out.
Oh, they'll be
It's
quite
actually
low.
like 5% there. Like
All right.
it's actually a number.
Let's move on quickly. Is super cyclone still a possibility with this storm? Of course it is.
Yes.
Could it become a Category 5? I think so.
Yes.
If it becomes 200 miles an hour like one of the HWRF runs, could it be a CDPS 10? Yes.
200 miles an hour, yeah.
Why do most, if not all, tropical cyclones have those extreme outer bands? I'm not sure what they mean by extreme, as in extremely wide-ranging, or what?
They might be talking about just the wider area of convection with Amphan itself, but I think more than just being at least semi-related to the storm, it is breaking out from the intertropical convergence zone, and it's just a wider area of convection that it's really spawned from more than anything else.
I'm taking and going back to the point here on O1L with New England. I'm seeing tropical storm force wind probabilities ranging anywhere from 3 to 5% between Dover, Delaware, and Yarmouth, Mass. I mean Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, rather, Boston, Mass.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I have been seeing a few interesting questions as well. So someone has been asking, is multiple times, do you think that Nuri will form on the 12th of November? Which no.
Can we stop asking?
Wait.
Well,
Can we
we
stop
may as well
answering
just
these
go and get
questions?
our crystal balls out here or something. We don't have any, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But I must say, we've got a huge amount of questions that are coming in. We're not going to be able to take them all, but we can take your questions off the air. If you send us a message on social media, on Facebook or Twitter, you can send us a message at Force 13 on those. You can see the outlets on our left-hand side right now. And of course, you can also join our growing Discord server. So all you Discorders out there, it's quite good, there's the link on the left-hand side, or you can contact me directly at my handle, which is Fool13 at extension 9094. But we are just a few minutes away from finishing at this point. We wanted to give you an hour briefing. We're not going full on with commentary on streaming yet, because we're still quite a long way away from Landfall. We always have to considering that we all do this on a voluntary basis and we don't have an enormous amount of personnel, we have to consider when's the best time to do things, when's the best time to back off a little bit. So we're doing an hour here, an hour there, but we're going to be ramping up the coverage gradually as the storm gets closer to land, and by the time the storm is reaching land, we'll be live talking about it every hour like we have done on previous occasions. Although this is the first time I think we've done it in this basin.
Yes, and I see another question from Sandy Rubik.
Yep.
At Force 13, could Cyclone Amphan become one of the worst disasters Bangladesh has seen in recent years? That I can
Easily.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're all
Easily.
agreed on
Of
that.
course.
I don't think we've underscored it hard enough tonight. Is the complications in any potential evacuations going on could just worsen any potential end effects from this system. Just because we're obviously not just dealing with a potentially catastrophic cyclone, but a once in a century, possibly plus, disease going around as well that everyone's obviously fearful about when considering whether or not they're even going to move in the first place. And I'm sure officials are
that's
going to
true.
have to rapidly make decisions about how to work around that to keep people safe in any potential evacuations. In very densely populated areas, it's going to be very difficult to get as many people out as possible as quick as they can.
Nightmare. Logistical nightmare.
Yes, and I also see another good question actually from Blue Gamer 144. Are higher water temperatures making storms more resistant to wind shear?
That's interesting.
Not necessarily. It's mainly just the size of the system and the intensity of it.
Is there any science
affects-
in that, Devon?
I completely missed the question.
Sea surface temperatures affecting wind shear.
Not that I know of. I do know once temperatures reach a certain temperature, I think it's like 32.5 Celsius, it actually starts having a negative effect into how strong the storm can get, because it has something to do with how much the water vapor is able to get into the atmosphere or something like that. It actually limits tropical cyclone development.
So you're saying there's a sweet spot then?
Yeah, there is a sweet spot. It's not just growing exponentially as you get higher with temperature. There's a cap, and that cap doesn't get broken until you get to hypercane status, which we're not going to talk about that here, obviously. But we're talking about sea surface temperatures being... I don't know if sea surface temperatures really affect shear, because shear is more of an upper atmosphere thing, rather than a lower atmosphere thing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think that there would be a correlation there. There could be, but I don't know of any.
So I also saw another comment from the Force 14 US channel. What storm could Amphan compare in terms of other northern Indian Ocean storms?
Sidir.
And
I mean, just straight away, Sidir is the best analog for this storm right now.
Yeah,
Wasn't
and the
that
worst case scenario,
2007?
Paula, but I don't want to really compare.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far yet. Mainly
Sorry
'cause we
about
don't know
that, by
where
the way.
landfall's going to be.
The outro music started a bit too loud. We're still playing with the settings here. So if you got slightly deafened by that, sorry about that. Well, that concludes this hour of discussion. It's been a fascinating discussion, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us. It's really flown by. This is a very serious situation. Our team will continue to do whatever they can off the air. Oh, the music ended again. Okay, great. Well, that's wonderful. I guess we'll just end silently tonight. We're still working that one out. But of course, you can follow us on social media, as we said, and our team will be providing regular updates throughout the rest of today, as it is in India and Bangladesh now, coming into the morning hours. Oh no, it is still going. It's going on that slide. We'll work this damn thing out one day. But for myself and the team, thanks for watching. It's been a pleasure to bring it to you. Obviously, the circumstances aren't great, and if you do have any questions, and if you do, well, we have our own communities out there as well, if you just fancy chatting to other weather watchers. Good night from me and the team. we'll see you again soon, probably with more live coverage tomorrow. As soon as we know the schedule, we'll let you know on our social media outlets and our YouTube channel. Good night and good morning in India.